Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King, joined here by our illustrious recruiting reporter, Mr. Christian Clemente. It was another weekend of talented visitors on the Plains, as we've been talking about on this show for quite a while. Auburn certainly not lacking in terms of the caliber of guys they've been able to get on campus. What is lacking, obviously, is their amount of recruits in the 2023 class, but Christian's going to be able to tell us a little bit today about some of these guys that visited and what chances they might have in terms of joining Auburn's 2023 class. So, Christian, thanks for coming on today. Another busy weekend of official visitors, just like last weekend. It seems like it'll be until they reach the dead period. We're going to do a little exercise here. We're going to go through each of these guys that visited today, and I want you to give me kind of a heat check on each guy, a 1 through 10. So, let's say, Braden Joyner, the offensive lineman nearby from Auburn High, who's committed to Auburn. I don't see anything happening in his recruitment right now by any stretch of the imagination that he wouldn't be coming to Auburn. So he'd be a 10 in terms of where he is with Auburn right now. Auburn is hot with his recruitment. And then another guy, like a 5-star West Coast quarterback who's never been to Auburn in his life and is already committed to USC or something. That guy's a 1, right? So kind of where you think these guys stand, because it was an interesting group of visitors today. All of these guys sort of people have been waiting on to come to campus because there's a lot of intriguing storylines here, and then some new storylines popped up. So just kind of your feel of where these guys all stand. We'll start. I won't bury the lead too much. We'll start with what I think is the biggest one of the day in terms of what he said, and that is the former Texas A&M commitment, Anthony James. Said that Auburn is now in his top 2, and not only that, he said that Auburn is on top. What can you tell us about him? He's a 4-star defensive lineman, and then what's your number on kind of where Auburn stands with him right now?
Yeah, so you just hit on it. He said Auburn's in the lead, and that kind of gives me maybe an 8 or a 9 in terms of heat check. Wow. He said he wants to commit early July. He's got one more visit left. He's going to go visit Washington next week, but he came away very, very impressed with Auburn. It was his first visit, and it seems like it really got the job done in terms of pushing Auburn ahead. This is a kid who can play defensive tackle, can play defensive end. He's got kind of the size to play a little bit all over the defensive line. And even a little bit before he decommitted from Texas A&M there at the end of May, Auburn and Jimmy Brumbaugh had been in on him for a little bit. And then as soon as he decommitted, they really kind of put the pressure on, and it seems to be working. And the official, you really can't ask for too much better other than him flat out committing. But it seems like he's very close. And he's got plans to commit there early July. So that looks like it's an Auburn commitment as of right now.
What's the other school in his top 2 again? And then what kind of, I guess, for them, what are they going to have to do you think, to move up to where Auburn is?
Yeah, so it's Washington. And then, he just said Auburn is just flat out recruiting him harder right now. They're pursuing him harder. They're showing more love, more attention to him. And he just seems to really like Auburn as well. I think while he is a Texas native, I think being a little bit closer at Auburn maybe is a slight advantage. He's obviously willing to go out and go play somewhere else, whether that's Washington or he visited Utah beforehand. But I do think Auburn and kind of playing in the South does benefit Auburn in this recruitment a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting guy. And so talking about the places that he's looking, not a West Coast guy. Obviously, he's from the West in Texas. But like you said, looking at those 2 Pac-12 schools, and Washington is up there with Auburn. So we'll see how that changes until his commitment in July. But yeah, I'm with you. That seems like one that Auburn is feeling pretty good about right now. If you're going to give him an 8 or a 9, I'm interested about your next one then, because we'll talk about Jeremiah Cobb. And you were saying today, you feel like you've written a million Jeremiah Cobb stories in the last couple months. But that's just because the guy keeps finding himself back at Auburn, which is a big thing for them. That's obviously great for Cadillac Williams and this staff. Cobb is a 4-star running back from Montgomery. Makes a lot of sense, really close by. Auburn keeps reeling him in. They keep bringing him back. You talked a while ago about his trip to Clemson and how that might be a bit of a scare for Auburn. But he had nothing but good things to say again today, and it seems like he's another guy that could be committing maybe sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so heat check wise, I'm probably putting Jeremiah Cobb in an 8 or a 9 as well, maybe a little closer to like a 7 or an 8. But I would still view him as a heavily Auburn lean, and especially after this visit this weekend. Look, you hit on it. he's been to Auburn so many times. He's familiar with Auburn. He's familiar with Cadillac Williams. The two have a great relationship. Being just down the road obviously does not hurt Auburn at all. That's a fantastic factor here. Clemson was a little bit kind of a scare there. All of a sudden Clemson popped up and he goes and officially visits there. And you kind of wonder, how much of a factor can Clemson be? And I still think they will be a factor going into that final decision, as will Tennessee, where he'll officially visit next weekend. But the thing is with Tennessee, they actually just took a running back commitment. So I think that kind of pushes them out a little bit further. I think they were kind of on the outside looking in anyway between Auburn and Clemson. So I really think this is Auburn and Clemson. And I think this is Auburn's battle to lose. He said today he's looking to make a decision kind of probably sometime after his officials end next weekend, maybe a July decision, maybe a Big Cat decision, something like that. Maybe he's back for Big Cat, makes a decision. Then we don't have an official date yet, but probably sometime in July. And I'd expect it to be pretty good news for Auburn fans.
Now, I don't have a particular order with the rest of these guys. Those were the two I definitely wanted to hit because, and you stop me if there's anyone else here today that you feel like is higher up in terms of, possibly popping in Auburn's direction. But it seemed like those two were the biggest ones, and Auburn got the best feeling out of today. But there were still plenty of other guys that they had on campus they were able to make a good impact on. We'll move on now with Lewis Carter, who has plenty of Auburn connections. He's a guy that they've been looking at getting back on campus since he came last year in the summer. 4-star linebacker out of Florida. He plays for Tampa Catholic, and so that's where Jarris McIntyre, the former Auburn wide receiver, that's where he's the head coach. Lewis talked today about that being a factor. Obviously, a guy like Jarris, and we've known him, through Auburn getting guys from there, recruiting guys from there. He's not going to push them in that direction, but it certainly doesn't hurt. There are other guys on that Tampa Catholic staff as well. But the other piece for Auburn that is different than when Lewis Carter was here last year, that's Christian Robinson. He's a guy he's known for more than 2 years. C-Rob was at Florida for 3 years. He was a young assistant on that Gator staff, making tons of inroads there in the Sunshine State, getting to know plenty of prospects there. And Lewis Carter said, he and Christian Robinson have had a really good relationship for a really long time now. His next visit is at UCF. And then he said, that's it. He doesn't have anything else planned for this summer. He does want to make a decision before the school year starts. So he's another guy that's kind of in this next month, 2-month range. He does have a top 4: Oklahoma, Auburn, North Carolina, and UCF. Obviously, he's yet to officially visit UCF. What are your thoughts on Lewis Carter? And I know he's pretty high up on their linebacker board. He's somebody they'd really like to get in this class. But what are your feelings right now in terms of how he compares to some of those other schools?
Yeah, so I didn't have a huge kind of grasp on, or a great grasp on his recruitment just coming into this visit because he hadn't been here in quite some time. But I think the Christian Robinson factor is definitely really big here, and you kind of touched on it. You can't really overstate that enough. I think he's been huge, not only with Lewis Carter, but other linebackers as well. As Auburn's linebacker board shakes out a little bit, you saw Deke Creighton go to Clemson. You see CJ Allen, who was in last week, kind of trending towards Georgia a little bit. Jaden Osbury has always kind of been atop the board there, but he's not decided until December. You're kind of looking for that second guy. And I think Lewis Carter might end up being that second guy right now. He seems to be trending, Auburn's direction. And the visit seems to have gone really well. I think Auburn and Oklahoma are probably the two main schools to watch here. Brent Venables was recruiting him at Clemson, offered him very early on as soon as he got over to Oklahoma. So there's definitely a long-standing relationship there as well. But I think Auburn has a lot of good factors playing for it as well.
What's your number here on Lewis Carter?
I'll go like 6 or 7, maybe. I would maybe favor Auburn just a little bit, maybe like 5, 6, 7. I know I'm giving like a range. I'm not giving a number at all. This has not been overly helpful, but
it's fine. There's no rules here.
Yeah, exactly. I'd probably lean Auburn just a little bit, give it like a 6 or a 7.
Okay. Yeah, that one will be interesting to watch. Again, he's at UCF, talking about current Auburn linebackers coach. Got a former Auburn linebackers coach in Travis Williams that's going to try to reel him in and make things interesting there down the stretch. But like Christian said, Auburn and Oklahoma might be the big players there. You talked about CJ Allen and Georgia. Let's move on to another guy. Speaking of Georgia, a Georgia commitment was on campus. Second straight weekend for Auburn. Last week, they had Bo Hewley, the 4-star offensive tackle. He was in. He's a Georgia commit. This weekend, they had Gabe Harris. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on him because he is a pass rusher. He's an edge rusher. We talked about Keldrick Falk last weekend. And so I'm interested in kind of your thoughts on where Gabe Harris sits on their board, because, it's interesting that Harsin, somebody on our board brought this up, seems to have no problem kind of swinging at all these Georgia guys and other commitments and kind of seeing what sticks. But what was interesting about Gabe Harris was he said the number one reason he looked into Auburn was because the coaches talked about playing time. And that's maybe something that backfires for Georgia very seldom. When you look at their recruiting success, it doesn't backfire all that often. But with a guy like him, he knows that Derek Hall and Eku Leota are going to be gone soon. At the edge position, there's really nobody else that's proven at the moment. And so, why not? Why can't he come in and make an impact on day one? But it might be a little bit for him, might be a little bit for us to figure this one out, because not only is he currently committed to Georgia, he's not going to make his final decision, which everybody makes their final decision on signing day. But he said if there's any sort of flip or anything, not going to do it until signing day in December. So lots of time left with this one. What are your feelings about this recruitment? And what did you kind of learn about him this weekend, as he, I believe he said this is his first Auburn visit since a basketball game last year. So it's been a minute for him.
Yeah. So if I had to put this at a number, I'd probably go like 4. I would still probably lean Georgia because he obviously is committed there. But I mean, this is going to be a battle down to the end. I really do think Auburn is very interested here. And I think Gabriel Harris is very interested in Auburn as well. You touched on it. The interesting part is the playing time. Sometimes you'll ask recruits, is early playing time does that matter to you? And they'll say, yeah, like it's kind of a factor. Or some will just say straight up, like, no, like I want to get coached. And if early playing time happens, that's great. But I mean, Gabriel Harris just flat out came and said it, like, yeah, that's a big factor for me. I could come in and start right away or make an impact right away. And that is in Auburn's favor. Now he obviously is still committed to Georgia. He said he's still solid to Georgia. But Auburn's going to keep battling here. And you touched on it there a little bit as well. I mean, Auburn, this is 3 weekends out of the past 4 weekends that a Georgia commit has come in and visited. Bo Healy was in, and then Raquez McElderry, the offensive lineman, was also in 2 or 3 weekends ago, whatever it was now. But Auburn's not afraid to back down necessarily from some of these other bigger schools. You saw it last year with Robert Woodyard. You saw it earlier this cycle with Jaleel Hurley, the Alabama commit as well. So now Auburn's taking kind of a swing at Gabe Harris to maybe try and fill out that edge room a little bit. And I do think, while I am putting him at a 4 right now, if he's a guy that comes back for a Big Cat weekend at the end of July, comes back for, he already said, I believe, I think it was Gabe Harris. We did a lot of interviews today. I think he's coming back from the Mercer game because his teammate, his former teammate plays at Mercer. So, if he starts coming back a little bit more consistently, maybe bump that 4 up to like a 6 or a 7. But for now, I'll put it at a 4.
We've got a question here in the Facebook chat asking about offensive line prospects. So that's where we'll go next. Lucky for you guys, Auburn had one in this weekend, third straight week. They've had a lot of talented offensive line guys in, which is what you always want to see. Obviously, they've already got a 4-star on board in the 2023 class in Braden Joyner. But they had Connor Liu on campus today. Interesting guy that I know they've wanted him on campus there for a while. Obviously, a monstrous offensive line prospect. But Christian, what you wrote about, it's interesting why the reason why Auburn, not the only reason, but certainly one of the factors why Auburn has put itself in a decent position down the stretch for him here in his recruitment, because he's got some other big time schools he's looking at, but Auburn's got a little bit of a standout advantage, something maybe that separates them from the rest of the pack.
Yeah, so he actually wants to be a pilot, and Auburn offers that pro flight school. And you look at a guy like Nick Brahms, the center right now for Auburn, who was Connor Liu's player host this weekend. He went to the aviation school here at Auburn and got his pilot's license. And Connor Liu is looking to do the same. So he's got a top 4 of Auburn, Georgia, Miami, and Clemson. So you're battling that out against some really, really top schools there. But for him, he said education and the academics that the schools offer plays a big role. So honestly, my biggest takeaway from the interview was that, and the fact that Auburn's pro flight school is offered, and that's a huge factor to him. So that's kind of the X factor in his recruitment for me personally. I think Auburn has some other factors as well, early playing time, and just he likes Auburn as well too. But all those schools offer different things, different benefits and whatnot. But Auburn's pro flight school is really kind of the biggest factor helping Auburn out here. And one other interesting note I took from that interview with him as well was he actually said they were looking at him as a center. I thought, maybe he would be more of a guard, but they were saying, yeah, we're looking at you as more of a center, which would make me assume that they kind of like Braden Joyner at maybe a guard position. We've looked at him as a center for now, but if you can get Connor Lew on board, you get him on board, and then you figure the rest out later. One of those guys can definitely switch to guard.
Where does Connor Lew sit in terms of their offensive line board? I know they love a guy like a Bo Hewley to get him in, but as you just pointed out, maybe down the stretch here, as we're sort of figuring out these evaluations from the coaching staff, that all three of those guys, talking about him, Joyner, and Connor Lew, might all be playing different positions if they were to come to Auburn. Where does is he Auburn's most sought after offensive line? Is he at that second tier, and where would you put your heat check with him?
Yeah. So I'll separate it because Bo is a tackle, and the tackle board is a little bit different as well. In terms of the interior offensive lineman, he probably sits at or near the top of that list. They really like Raquez McElderry, really like DJ Chester. I might put DJ Chester atop that board actually, but then you got Connor Lew and McElderry right there as well. And I wrote about it a little bit last week in my Clemente's Confidential, but I mean, they're looking to bring in like 7 offensive linemen in this class, and some will be transfers. So you have plenty of space in terms of bringing different guys in. Heat check wise, I would put this at maybe like a 4.5, because I don't know if I would say Auburn. I feel like if you put it at a 5, maybe, I don't know. I'll go 5, because I think Auburn has as good of a chance as any other school does in his recruitment. I'm not going to say Auburn's a favorite here, but I do think Auburn has a pretty solid shot here, especially after this visit.
Last one we've got was David Hobbs, the 4-star defensive lineman. He's a guy that's blown up recently, probably the most out of all these guys. His recruitment has sort of taken off, and it was interesting to hear him talk about what that's been like to go from a guy that, look, I mean, he was still a highly rated recruit that was going to go play for the Power 5. But as you wrote today, Auburn, Ole Miss, Michigan, Alabama, and Tennessee. Alabama and Tennessee were a couple of those that he mentioned today as very strongly entering the mix for his recruitment. But seems like Auburn did a good job hosting him today, but maybe in terms of buzz, this was toward the bottom in terms of the visitors. I'm interested to hear your opinion on him, because we've already talked about a guy like an Anthony James, who maybe is in line to commit to Auburn. So as you go down their defensive line board here, where does a guy like David Hobbs stand?
Yeah, so I do think he's still kind of up towards the top of the board for Auburn, kind of in that middle to upper echelon, but you kind of hit on it. I mean, I think this is a recruitment that's going to go on for probably quite some time. Next couple of months, he's going to take some visits during the season. He doesn't want to make a decision until after he gets all of his official visits in, which is just partially because of how much he's blowing up, to be honest. I mean, he got 5 huge offers over the past month or so. I'm sure some more will probably start rolling in, so he probably wants to get an idea of who all is really interested in him. Make sure he gets all of his visits in, his official visits, go take some unofficials as well, and then assess from there. I mean, Auburn's in his top group, but it's just very hard to read right now because his recruitment is not starting over again, but it feels like there's a new leaf being branched out in his recruitment right now, just with so many schools getting involved. And I mean, Auburn is one of those schools, to be honest. So we'll kind of see where things go with him. Heat check wise, I would go maybe like a 3.5 or a 4, but that's just because we don't have a lot of information on him. And It seems like things are going to go on for a little while here.
Yeah, it's early, like you said, and Auburn getting one of these first. Look, he hasn't gone to Alabama or Tennessee.
No, those are going to be visits during the season, probably.
Yeah, those are down the line, and so if it's early, I mean, it's going to go on a long time, and he's still one of the guys on top of Auburn's board in terms of the defensive front. I think they've done a good job making sure they get him on campus pretty quickly once he started blowing up in terms of his recruitment, and so that's it for everybody who visited, except for one that we probably should have mentioned at the outset. And it was the first guy who left this morning. Bright and early, Auburn actually got a commitment that we have yet to talk about on here. It's their 10th transfer, so they've now surpassed their transfer number from last season when they had 9 guys. I was thinking about it, Christian. You could pretty much make a whole defense with the transfers that they've gotten. They've pretty much got one at every kind of position on the defense: safety, cornerback, linebacker, interior, defensive line, and now an edge guy. 6 guys on defense overall. actually. But Bragg played at Western Kentucky for the past 3 seasons. It's difficult. He's from Arizona. Very low-rated recruit that turned himself into a decently productive player.
He was a JUCO guy,
Yeah, JUCO guy that turned himself into a pretty productive player at Western Kentucky. Grad transfer now, only 1 year of eligibility left. It's difficult. You and I have been going back and forth about this for the last 24 hours. Difficult to peg exactly how many sacks he had last season. Western Kentucky says 2.5. Sports Reference says 4. ESPN says 3. Says 3. PFF says 3. And Marcus Bragg says 6. So it's difficult to figure out exactly how many. But he was decently productive as far as we can tell as a rotational guy. He wasn't the star pass rusher for them. So this was a situation where obviously Auburn whiffed on a couple edge targets. We knew they were going to come around and get one eventually, but you didn't need a superstar. Some other positions, like interior defensive line and quarterback, you needed a guy that was very proven and that was going to be able to plug and play immediately. This guy, they're kind of thinking he's going to be the number 4 edge rusher. But in terms of the way Auburn's defense looks right now in the depth chart, the number 4 edge rusher position is very important for this team, because finally they've rounded out a complete rotation with 4 guys. You play 2 and then 2 guys come in to spell them. Finally, they've rounded out a rotation that is all scholarship players, because they've only had 3 scholarship players for a long time. So this seems like an addition where there's not necessarily going to be a bunch of pressure on him to produce. Obviously, he's looking forward to producing, but it's more so about getting a body in there that has a little bit of experience, just because that was a position group that was so thin and has finally now been filled out.
Yeah, it's such a low risk pickup, but it's a very high reward in terms of Auburn's roster. You needed to get somebody to help that edge position. They looked at the guy transferring from UCLA. He ultimately kind of wanted more playing time and he went elsewhere. But Marcus Bragg was willing to come in, and you're looking at him as maybe filling that TD Moultrie role a little bit, maybe being that 3rd or 4th guy somewhere in there. But he's a serviceable backup that I think will be important for this team, because without him, you were counting on Joko Willis to instantly be one of those guys moving over from linebacker to edge to rotate in instantly. And I still think he will get some snaps. I think he's very talented. He's very fast coming off the edge there as well. But I think now that you have Bragg, you can kind of cool the jets a little bit there, and you feel a little bit more comfortable in terms of the depth that you have there, especially if a guy were to go down with an injury or something like that. You just feel a lot better at the edge position. It's not a superstar pickup. You're not picking up your quarterback in Zach Calzada or Robbie Ashford, but you're making a pickup that's going to play a big impact every week in terms of helping out the team and helping make sure that guys have the ability to rest a little bit, because Derek Hall and Ekeliota, they can't play every snap.
Yeah, now it becomes a situation where you don't need Dylan Brooks to be, a standout player immediately. He really highly rated recruit, didn't play at all last season. So, they were really, position coach Rock Bellantoni talked about it in the spring. He said, right now we are asking a lot of Dylan Brooks, and it looks like we're going to need him a lot. I think you'll still need him. He's a guy that's going to, he could be an NFL player one day. He's got that kind of talent. He'll be a guy that'll contribute like that in the future. But like you said, right now, this was as big a move as any, just to kind of take pressure off that position group and kind of thin things out. Last thing, Christian, and then we'll let you go. Just a couple guys here that we've got that'll be coming up visiting. We'll be obviously previewing that during the week. But what can you tell us about the guys who are coming on campus this week? You got Carmelo English. That's somebody that you have been really high on for a while in terms of Auburn's offensive receiver board, or wide receiver board. And then Darren Reed. And then I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the last name here. I'll just let you talk about what their recruitments look like this week and kind of preview their visits to Auburn this week.
Yes, these guys are coming in on midweek visits. There's going to be weekend visitors as well. I'm sure we'll probably do a podcast, or I'll have some content out for that as well. But for these guys, Carmelo is coming in tomorrow on Monday, or maybe when you're listening to this, it is Monday. But he's coming in and he's nearing a commitment. I wrote about this in my Behind the Crystal Ball. It's a July 2nd commitment date there, and all signs point to Auburn. If we were continuing to do heat check, I know he hasn't taken his visit yet, but this would be another 8 or 9, probably closer to a 9. I feel fantastic about Auburn here. I think Auburn would be extremely disappointed if he ended up elsewhere. Deron Reed, defensive lineman, he's coming in Tuesday, along with the other player, Nikhil Bertrand. Looking forward to meeting him, to finding out exactly how to pronounce his name. But Deron Reed is a Another 4-star defensive lineman who I think he has an early July commitment date, probably leaning LSU there. Auburn maybe could make some moves this weekend, but I don't think he's a huge priority guy when you look at how many defensive linemen are on the board right now. You don't feel like you're super pressured to try and make a big move this week. And then the other guy, Nikhil Bertrand, is a very interesting case because we have him listed as an offensive tackle. Auburn's recruiting him as a defensive lineman, actually. He was committed to Colorado, and he hasn't officially decommitted yet, but he went out and released like a new top 10, which kind of makes you think that he backed off that commitment. And it came after getting Auburn offer, Georgia offer, some other big name offers have kind of come in and started recruiting him a little bit more. So those guys are coming in. I honestly have no clue where his recruitment stands with Auburn. I mean, he got an offer, and I had heard that there was a chance he would come in and visit, but now it's officially set. So hopefully I'll have more on him kind of this week, and especially after his visit. But I'm not sure where he stands on the board for Auburn defensive tackle wise. He's certainly an interesting prospect. I think he's 6'7", 310. So you're looking at a massive potential defensive tackle there. So it'll be interesting kind of to see what he has to say after the visit and his impression of Auburn.
6'7", 310, listed as an offensive lineman. Auburn's recruiting him as a D lineman. He's from Philadelphia, and he is currently committed to Colorado. So I don't think anyone will blame you for not exactly knowing how Auburn stands with a guy like him right now. So that'll be interesting to see for those midweek visits. So that'll do it today. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Auburn Undercover podcast. It's been a very long day, Christian.
Extremely long.
It's been long. Yeah, we're going to go celebrate with some ice cream tonight, I think. But Christian, thanks for joining us today. We'll have you on later in the week to talk about those guys, and obviously whenever they visit, we'll talk about the midweek visits and the visitors next weekend. If you guys like the show, please leave us a 5-star review. That is the number one thing that helps us out. The intro and outro music is by Beats by Mordecai. You guys can follow him on Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. And until the next episode, everybody have a great start to the week. We'll talk